Welcome back to Tactical Bass, and Matt Allen here. Today I want to talk to you about fishing with braided line, making that transition and what it takes to do it from fishing mono or fluorocarbon to switching over fully to braid. I remember being in a seminar quite a few years ago. Gary Dobbins was the speaker, and he was talking about using braided line to fish topwaters. At the time, that was such an eye-opener to me. I didn't think he meant it. I thought he was kidding at first, because to me, braid was only for frogs and heavy flipping. I didn't know you could use it for spooks, let alone for jigs or a drop shot or a swim bait. I had no idea. But over the last few years, I've facilitated this switch in my own fishing, where I've gone from mono and fluoro to 100% braided line for every application, and I believe that it has made a major impact for the better in my fishing. So what I wanted to talk to you about is what it takes to do that. Because a lot of people don't know, they think they're going to switch to braid and suddenly they're going to break rods and straighten out hooks and their eyelets can't hold up. And maybe some of that was true a few years ago, but not anymore. There are a couple simple things you can do with your equipment to facilitate braided line very, very smoothly. The first one is changing your hooks, and it's very, very simple. Everything from worm hooks to treble hooks. When I was fishing on, this is a topwater, it's like a super spook, it's just a big popper. When I was fishing topwaters in the past on mono, I'd use really light hooks, but a fairly stout rod. So what I've done now for the hooks is, instead of using 1X treble hooks, I simply use 2X treble hooks. So just a little bit stronger, a little bit heavier, and then I make up for it elsewhere. So you just step your hooks up a little bit. No big deal, you don't have to make a huge change. If you're using 3/0 hooks while you're worm fishing, you don't suddenly need to use a 5/0 hook. You just need to use a little stronger 3/0. Very, very simple. The second thing I've done is I've adjusted all of my rods. That was the most important part of the switch. Now, I didn't go out and buy all new rods. Don't get me wrong. Don't think you've got to go sell 15 rods and buy new tackle. All you have to do is back everything down 1 notch. So what I was using to throw a worm was now my jig rod. What I was using to drop shot became my tube rod. That sort of thing, where you're just lightening your rods just a little bit. So this is a 733, actually it's a 743, a 743 power rod. That's like a medium light, but that's what I use for treble hooks, where I used to use a medium. For jigs, I used to fish a jig on a 6 power rod. That's an extra heavy flipping stick. Once I made the switch over to braid, I didn't have to do that anymore. The braid is giving me that impact, that hard hook set that I used to need the stout rod for. So now I just use a little bit lighter rod. I use a 5 power, which is more like a heavy instead of an extra heavy. It's still a fairly stout rod, but a good parabolic action through the whole rod. So it makes it very, very simple. I use it for crankbaits. When I'm cranking straight braid, but I've gone to a much longer rod. This is an 8-foot rod. It's a medium action, nice slow taper, so the whole rod bows on a big fish. But again, I can get away with braid. I get all the benefits of braid. I get better sensitivity. I get stronger hook sets. There's just all around more power, more control of the fish. But I'm stepping those rods down 1 notch to accommodate that, so I'm not breaking line or straightening hooks or those things. It's a very simple concept. Now, I do sometimes tie leaders on. I do that quite often, really, to also help with that little bit of give, because the braid is so strong. So I use a lot of mono leaders because they're not really there so much for the visual. I'm not worried about the fish seeing my line. They're there for stretch, to take some of that shock out. If you get a big fish to the side of the boat and you miss the net and she makes one more run, if there's no mono there and she's pulling straight against that braid, something's got to give. So I put a length of mono in there. It varies, but usually about 6 or 7 feet, to be that little bit of shock absorber right at the boat, so I can turn her around and get her back into the net. Now also, what size braid you use matters. There are all sorts of different options out there, but like anything else, I try to keep it very, very simple. I only use a couple sizes. For my spinning rods, I use 20-pound braid. For my light bait casters, I use 30. For my heavy bait casters, I use 65. And for my swim baits, I use 80. And that is it. I never vary from that. So my jigs, I've got 65-pound braid, and then I tie my mono leader on there. For my top waters, crankbaits, Senkos, stuff like that, I'm using 30-pound braid, and then I tie a leader on that, or if I'm using the top water or the crank, I tie direct. You don't really need it for those. Last, I want to talk about the swim bait. This was the final transition I made. For years, I was using all braid on everything but a swim bait rod, and I was convinced that mono was the only way to go with the swim bait, and I just don't believe that anymore. I've now had 2 seasons, almost 3 seasons, throwing swim baits on braided line, and I will never go back. You feel more bites, you have more control over the fish, there's just no downside to it. Again, I adjust the rods a little bit, I step it down 1 power, and I do always tie that mono leader. And to connect those, by the way, I use a blood knot. There's only 4 real knots that I use with any regularity in fishing, and I actually already filmed a video about those, so I'll give you a link to that as well. But I tie that mono leader, and then I fish straight braid on all of my swim baits, big or small. I don't care how big it is. You get more feel, you have a positive hook set, you keep those fish pinned, you get more fish in the boat. So don't be afraid of braid. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's an easy switch. You can do it with the gear you already have. You just take all your rods and step them back 1 step. That's all you need to do. You're going to feel more fish, hook more fish, and get more big fish to the boat. I hope this helps. Have a great day.